You got 72 hours to disappear, or I'll have you dragged out in handcuffs. The man filled the doorway at 6:47 a.m. Behind him, 2 maintenance workers blocked the hallway, arms crossed, tool belts heavy. The woman in the doorway wore a robe. No makeup, no coffee yet. She held the eviction notice he'd shoved into her hands. 3 pages, stapled crooked, still warm from the printer. He had chosen the wrong tenant. She read the notice once, then twice. Her hand didn't shake. "Notice to quit," the header screamed. "Pursuant to OCGA, Section 44-7-50, you have 3 days to vacate premises for material breach of lease terms, including unauthorized occupants and excessive noise violations. Dated March 3rd. Sincerely, Loomis Property Management, LLC." The property manager stepped closer. His breath smelled like cigarettes and authority. "You deaf? I said 72 hours. Start packing." She didn't step back. Instead, she reached into her robe pocket, slowly, deliberately, and pulled out her phone. She photographed the notice, front, back, the date stamp. Then she raised the camera and photographed his face. "The hell you doing?" "Documenting." One word, no explanation, no tremor in her voice. His smirk faltered, just for half a second. The maintenance workers exchanged a glance. "You think picture's gonna save you?" He laughed, a hard, barking sound. "Lady, I've evicted 43 tenants from this building. 43. You know how many fought back?" She waited. "Zero that one." He turned to leave, then stopped, looked back over his shoulder. 44 is going to be my favorite." The door closed softly. Not slammed, closed. She stood in her apartment, morning light cutting through the blinds, and reached for a folder she'd been keeping for 11 weeks. Manila. Thick. Tabbed with colored dividers. Inside, 78 photographs, 14 certified mail receipts, 6 audio recordings, 1 spreadsheet tracking every interaction, time-stamped to the minute. She added today's date to the log. Then she made a phone call. "It's starting," she said, "exactly like we predicted." Jumped. If you're already satisfying with this satisfying video, please subscribe to our channel and smash the like button to support us. 11 weeks earlier, January, Atlanta. Simone Ashford chose the building deliberately. Not the gleaming high-rise downtown where her colleagues lived. Not the gated community in Buckhead with the doormen and the security cameras and the assumption of belonging. She chose a 4-story walk-up in a gentrifying neighborhood 3 miles from the city center. Brick facade, fire escapes rusting at the joints, rent-stabilized units on the 2nd floor. Her sedan fit the parking lot. Her clothes fit the neighborhood. That was the point. The moving truck arrived at 8 a.m. on a Tuesday. She didn't hire movers. She carried each box herself, 47 of them, up 3 flights of stairs, over 6 hours. The building superintendent watched from the lobby, cigarette dangling, offering nothing. Simone unpacked in a specific order. Documents first, filed by date in a fireproof cabinet she'd brought from her previous address. Tax returns, bank statements, property records, insurance policies. Every piece of paper that proved she existed, organized and accessible within arm's reach of her bed. Electronics second. Cables labeled with masking tape. Surge protectors on every outlet. A backup hard drive that synced automatically to a cloud server she'd configured herself. Clothes last. She didn't own much. Functional pieces in neutral colors. Nothing that attracted attention. Nothing that invited questions. Every box had an inventory taped inside the lid. When she finished, she walked through the apartment once, photographed each room from multiple angles, and emailed the images to herself with the subject line, Unit 4C, Move-in Condition, January 7th. The unit was clean, modest. The lease was month to month, unusual, but she'd signed without negotiating. She had her reasons. Day 3. The knock came at 7:15 a.m. No warning, no appointment. Simone opened the door to find a man in his 50s, thick through the shoulders, wearing a polo shirt with Loomis Property MGMT embroidered over the chest pocket. His name tag said Garrett. His expression said he'd already decided something about her. Routine inspection. He didn't phrase it as a request. Building policy. New tenants get checked after 72 hours. She stepped aside. Let him walk through. Said nothing when he opened her refrigerator, her closet, her medicine cabinet. He moved slowly, deliberately, touching things he had no reason to touch. A framed photograph on her dresser, the spine of a book on her nightstand, the edge of her shower curtain. You live alone? Yes. No boyfriends? Kids? Nobody staying over? She kept her voice neutral. The lease permits overnight guests up to 14 consecutive days. I've read it. He didn't like that answer. She saw it in his jaw, the slight clench, the way his molars pressed together before he spoke again. Just asking. He wrote something on his clipboard. Some tenants, they move in alone. Then suddenly there's 5 people living here, cooking smells in the hallway, noise at all hours. You understand. I understand what you're implying. He looked up, met her eyes for the first time. I'm not implying anything, Ms. He checked his clipboard. Ashford. I'm doing my job. Then you'll have no objection to providing me a copy of the building policy requiring 72-hour inspections. I'd like it in writing. Silence. 3 seconds. 5. I'll see what I can find. He moved toward the door. Welcome to the building. He didn't provide the policy. She checked her mailbox every day for 2 weeks. Nothing. She noted this in her spreadsheet. Column F. Documentation requested. Column G. Documentation received. The second column stayed empty. The mailroom, week 2. Simone collected her mail at the same time each day, 4:15 p.m., after the carrier finished the building but before the evening rush. Routine. Predictable. Safe. The woman was already there when Simone arrived. Blonde, mid-40s, tennis bracelet catching the fluorescent light. She stood at the community bulletin board pinning a flyer for an HOA meeting, even though this building didn't have an HOA. You're in 4C? Simone didn't startle. She'd seen the woman watching her before, from the adjacent condo building that shared the parking lot. Always watching, never approaching. Until now. Yes. That unit's been empty a while. The woman smiled. Too many teeth. Garrett said the last tenant left, suddenly. I wouldn't know. I'm Paige Drummond. She extended her hand. Simone shook it briefly. I'm president of the Homeowners Association next door. We keep an eye on things around here. Neighborhood watch, you know. Safety. I appreciate the concern. Just saying. Paige's smile tightened at the edges. This building has a certain character. People notice things. People talk. She paused, letting the words settle. I'm sure you understand. Simone understood exactly what she meant. I'll keep that in mind. She took her mail, 2 bills, 1 catalog, 1 piece of obvious junk, and walked to the elevator. Behind her, she heard Paige's heels clicking toward the exit. That night, Simone added a new tab to her spreadsheet. Social interactions, non-resident. First entry, Paige Drummond, HOA president, adjacent property. Notes, implied surveillance, implied warning, tone, hostile beneath courtesy. February 8th, 9:14 p.m. Simone was reading, no music, no television, just the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional car passing on the street below, when the knock came. Garrett Loomis stood in the hallway. This time, he wasn't alone. A woman flanked him, short, wiry, work boots, a ring of keys on her belt. Her name tag read, Jolene Fitch, Superintendent. Got a noise complaint. Garrett's voice carried down the corridor, loud enough for neighbors to hear. Third one this week. Simone remained in her doorway. From whom? Anonymous, building policy. I'd like to see the complaint log. Jolene Fitch snorted. You'd like to see a lot of things. Garrett stepped forward, close enough that Simone could smell the beer on his breath. Faint, but there. Look, Ms. Ashford, I'm trying to be reasonable here, but I got other tenants complaining. Says you're playing music late, got people coming and going at all hours. I haven't played music since I moved in. I don't own speakers. Then maybe it's the TV. I don't own a television. Silence. Garrett and Jolene exchanged a glance. Well, Garrett said finally, maybe the walls are thin. Maybe sounds carry. Point is, I'm getting complaints, and I gotta document them. He held up his clipboard, where he'd already written something. Consider this your first official warning. I'd like a copy of that warning, and the complaints it references. I'll see what I can do. He turned and walked away. Jolene lingered a moment longer, eyes traveling slowly over Simone's apartment, what she could see of it through the doorway. Nice place, she said. Be a shame if something needed fixing. The door closed. Simone documented everything: time, date, participants, exact words spoken. Then she filed an open records request with Fulton County for all noise complaints associated with her address. The response came 3 weeks later. Official letterhead, 1 page. No noise complaints have been filed for Unit 4C, 2847, Collier Road Northwest, between January 1st and February 28th of this year. She added the document to her folder. Column G finally had an entry. Official record, no complaints filed. February 19th, 7:02 a.m. Simone woke to the sound of her door opening. Not a knock, not a warning. The mechanical click of a key turning in a lock she'd secured the night before. She was out of bed in 3 seconds, standing in her hallway in 4. Garrett Loomis was already inside her apartment, Jolene Fitch behind him, both staring at her like she was the intruder. Emergency inspection. Garrett held up his phone. Water leak reported. Unit below you called it in. Simone's voice came out steady, cold. Georgia law requires 24 hours written notice for non-emergency entry. OCGA, Section 44-7-34. This is unlawful. Garrett laughed. Lady, there's water dripping through someone's ceiling. You want me to wait 24 hours while their apartment floods? Show me the leak. He blinked. What? If there's an emergency, show me where the water is coming from. Show me the damage. Let me see it. Silence. Jolene shifted her weight. The keys on her belt jingled. It's in the walls. Garrett's confidence wavered just slightly. We need to check your pipes. Simone didn't move. I'll need documentation of the reported leak, the source, the timestamp, the reporting party, standard procedure for liability purposes. Standard procedure. The phrase landed differently than she'd intended. Or maybe exactly as she'd intended. Garrett's eyes narrowed. You don't tell me how to run my building. I'm requesting documentation, that's all. He stared at her for a long moment. Then he shoved past her, shoulder checking her hard enough that she stumbled, and walked to the bathroom. Opened the cabinet under the sink, ran his hand along the pipes. Nothing here. He sounded almost disappointed. As I suspected. He turned, moved toward the kitchen, checked those pipes too. Jolene followed, saying nothing, but her eyes were everywhere. On Simone's laptop, on her filing cabinet, on the folder sitting on the kitchen table, with its colored tabs visible. 7:11 a.m. 9 minutes of unlawful presence. Garrett headed for the door, paused at the threshold. You know what your problem is, Ms. Ashford? He didn't wait for an answer. You think you're smarter than everyone else. You think your little procedures and documentation are going to protect you. He smiled. No warmth in it. But this is my building. My rules. And nobody... He stepped closer. Nobody tells me what I can and can't do in my own property. He left. Jolene followed, pulling the door shut behind her. Simone stood in her kitchen for a full minute, heart pounding, not from fear, but from the effort of keeping her face blank. Then she checked every pipe in the apartment, photographed them all, noted the time, 7:14 a.m., no leak, no damage, no emergency. She added the incident to her spreadsheet. Column H, unlawful entry. Column 1, duration, 9 minutes. Column J, witnesses, Jolene Fitch. Then she made a phone call. They entered without notice, she said. Physical contact during the encounter. It's escalating faster than I anticipated. The voice on the other end was calm, professional. Document everything. We're on schedule, 3 days later. February 22nd. Simone returned from errands, groceries, dry cleaning, a certified letter she'd sent to Garrett requesting the documentation he still hadn't provided, to find her door unlocked. Not open. Just unlocked. The deadbolt she'd engaged that morning, disengaged. She pushed the door open slowly, checked the corners, checked the closet, checked behind the bathroom door. Empty, but not unchanged. The window in her bedroom, the one that overlooked the fire escape, had a broken latch, snapped clean, fresh splinters on the sill, metal bent at an angle that suggested force, and on her kitchen counter, a typed note. Maintenance completed per tenant request, 2/22, J. Fitch. Simone stared at the note for a long moment. She hadn't requested maintenance. She hadn't spoken to Jolene Fitch since the unlawful entry 3 days ago, and the window latch had been intact when she'd left that morning. She'd checked it, as she checked everything, as part of her routine. They were building a paper trail. She recognized the pattern now, the noise complaints that didn't exist, the emergency inspections for leaks that weren't there, the maintenance requests she'd never made, each one a piece of documentation, each one designed to establish a narrative. Problem tenant, troublemaker, someone who didn't belong. She photographed the broken latch, close-up of the splinters, close-up of the tool marks on the metal, fresh scratches that caught the afternoon light. Then she photographed the note, including the timestamp from her phone's camera. She checked her lease. Section 9.4. Tenant shall be responsible for damages caused by tenant's negligence or misuse. They weren't just building a paper trail, they were building a case. Her phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. Heard you had some property damage. Shame. Those old windows are expensive to replace. G. She screenshotted the message, added it to the folder. March 1st. Rent was due on the 1st of every month. Simone had paid on February 26th, 5 days early, as always. Bank transfer. Automatic. She had confirmation numbers, transaction IDs, everything documented. The letter arrived on March 2nd. Notice of non-payment. Our records indicate that rent for Unit 4C remains outstanding for the month of March. Pursuant to your lease agreement, a late fee of $75 has been assessed. Please remit payment within 5 business days to avoid further action. Simone read the letter twice. Then she pulled up her bank statement. Transaction ID number ATL-4427891, dated February 26, 8:47 a.m. Recipient, Loomis Property, MGMT LLC. Amount, $1,247. Status, completed. She walked to the management office, first floor of the building, a converted studio apartment with a desk, 2 filing cabinets, and a waiting area that consisted of 3 plastic chairs and a dead plant. Garrett was there, so was Jolene, and a third person Simone didn't recognize, a man in his 30s, wearing a suit that didn't quite fit, reviewing papers on Garrett's desk. Miss Ashford. Garrett didn't stand. What can I do for you? She placed the bank statement on his desk. Your notice claims non-payment. This is my proof of payment, cleared 5 days ago. Garrett glanced at the statement, shrugged. System shows nothing. Must be a bank error. The transaction is marked completed. The funds left my account on February 26th. Then maybe you typed in the wrong account number. Maybe the money went somewhere else. He smiled. Not my problem. I have the confirmation receipt. The account number matches your published payment portal exactly. Garrett leaned back in his chair. Look, Ms. Ashford, I don't know what to tell you. Our system says you didn't pay. Your system says you did. Somebody's wrong. He spread his hands. Maybe try paying on time next month, if you're still here. The man in the suit looked up, met Simone's eyes briefly, looked away. She retrieved her bank statement, stood in the doorway a moment longer. I'll be filing a formal complaint with the Georgia Department of Community Affairs, she said, and I'll be requesting an audit of your payment records through the Open Records Act. Garrett's smile didn't waver. You do that. She did. March 3rd, 6:47 a.m. The notice to quit. 72 hours to vacate. Alleged violations. Unauthorized occupants. She lived alone. Excessive noise. No complaints on record. Failure to pay rent. Paid and documented. Property damage. Fabricated by Jolene Fitch. Simone documented the notice. Photographed Garrett's face. Said one word, documenting, and closed the door. Then she sat at her kitchen table, opened her laptop, and began drafting her response. Not emotional, not defensive. Point by point, allegation by allegation, with supporting documentation for each. RE. Notice to quit dated March 3rd. Dear Mr. Loomis, I am in receipt of your notice and right to dispute each allegation contained therein. Allegation 1. Unauthorized occupants. I am the sole occupant of Unit 4C. I have had no overnight guests during my tenancy. I request documentation of any complaints alleging otherwise, as required under Georgia tenant rights law. Allegation 2. Excessive noise. Per the attached response from Fulton County, Exhibit A, no noise complaints have been filed for this address during my tenancy. I request documentation of the anonymous complaints referenced in your notice. Allegation 3. Failure to pay rent. Per the attached bank statement, Exhibit B, rent was paid on February 26th, 5 days before the due date. Transaction ID number ATL-44278891. Status: completed. Allegation 4. Property damage. The window latch referenced in your maintenance report, Exhibit C, was damaged between the hours of 9 a.m. and 2 p.m. on February 22nd, while I was not present. I have photographic evidence, Exhibit D, showing tool marks inconsistent with tenant damage, as well as a text message from your phone number, Exhibit E, referencing this damage before any repair was reported. I am prepared to contest any dispossessory action through appropriate legal channels. Please be advised that I am documenting all interactions with management and will be filing formal complaints with the Georgia Real Estate Commission and the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Sincerely, Simone Ashford. She sent the letter, certified mail. Return receipt requested. Then she made another phone call. They filed the notice, she said. 3 days to respond, but there's something else. What? The man in the office yesterday, suit, early 30s. I didn't recognize him, but he was reviewing papers, legal documents, from what I could see. A pause. They're preparing for court, faster than expected. They want me gone before I can build my case. Can you delay? Simone looked at her folder. 78 photographs, now 83. 14 certified mail receipts, now 16. 6 audio recordings, now 8. I don't need to delay, she said. I need them to keep going. The more they do, the more I have. And if they win the eviction? She didn't hesitate. Then I take everything. The building, the company, all of it. If you want to see how Simone fights back, make sure to subscribe and leave a like. March 5th. The letter came certified mail, which was almost funny. Simone using their own tactics against them using hers right back. RE, Material Lease Violations, Unit 4C. Dear Ms. Ashford, this office has been retained to represent Loomis Property Management, LLC, in connection with your tenancy at the above referenced property. Please be advised that our client has documented numerous violations of your lease agreement, including but not limited to 1. Unauthorized modifications to window fixtures, 2. Failure to timely remit rent, 3. Repeated noise disturbances, and 4. Hostile and threatening behavior toward management staff. Pursuant to OCGA Section 44-7-50, you are hereby provided 5 days to cure said violations or vacate the premises. Failure to comply will result in the immediate initiation of dispossessory proceedings. We trust this matter can be resolved without the necessity of court intervention. Very truly yours, Sterling Ames, Esquire. Ames & Associates, LLC. Simone read the letter 3 times. Then she researched Sterling Ames. Fulton County Bar Association, admitted 2009. Specialty: landlord-tenant disputes, commercial evictions, property management litigation. Client list: 14 property management companies in the greater Atlanta area, including 3 that had faced fair housing complaints in the past 5 years. A professional, a specialist, someone who knew exactly how to work the system. She drafted her response that night. Dear Mr. Ames, thank you for your letter of March 5th. I write to formally dispute each allegation raised therein. Regarding unauthorized modifications, the window damage referenced in your notice occurred during an unauthorized entry by building staff on February 22nd. I have photographic evidence of tool marks inconsistent with tenant use, as well as documentation that no maintenance request was submitted by me. Regarding failure to remit rent, please find attached a bank statement showing payment in full on February 26th, 5 days before the due date. Regarding noise disturbances, pursuant to the Georgia Open Records Act, I have obtained confirmation from Fulton County that no noise complaints have been filed for my address during my tenancy. Regarding hostile behavior, I have audio and video documentation of all interactions with management staff. I am prepared to submit this evidence in any legal proceeding. I note that your letter does not address my formal request for documentation supporting your client's allegations. I renew that request now, pursuant to Georgia tenant rights law. Please be advised that I intend to file formal complaints with the Georgia Real Estate Commission and the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development concerning the conduct described above. I look forward to resolving this matter appropriately. Sincerely, Simone Ashford. She sent it certified mail. Return receipt requested. Sterling Ames did not respond. March 7th. The motion to shorten the response window arrived by email. A courtesy copy, the header said, as if they were doing her a favor. Motion for expedited proceedings comes now plaintiff, Loomis Property Management, LLC, by and through counsel, and respectfully moves this court to shorten the response period in the above captioned matter from 30 days to 10 days, and in support thereof states as follows. 1. Plaintiff has documented extensive lease violations by defendant, including property damage, noise disturbances, and failure to pay rent. 2. Defendant has demonstrated hostile and threatening behavior toward plaintiff's staff, creating an unsafe environment for other tenants and employees. 3. Continued delay will result in imminent and irreparable harm to plaintiff's property and business interests. Wherefore, plaintiff respectfully requests this court grant an expedited hearing schedule. Respectfully submitted, Sterling Ames, Esquire. Simone read the motion twice. Then she sat at her kitchen table and wrote her opposition brief. It took 4 hours. No template, no precedent to follow, just legal research, careful reasoning, and precise language. Defendant's opposition to motion for expedited proceedings comes now. Defendant Simone Ashford pro se and respectfully opposes plaintiff's motion for expedited proceedings, and in support thereof states as follows. 1. Plaintiff's motion fails to meet the standard for expedited proceedings under Georgia law. See Benton v. Regal Properties, 2019. Georgia Appellate Lexus, 442. Expedited proceedings require demonstrated exigency, not mere allegations. 2. Plaintiff has failed to provide any documentation supporting its allegations of lease violations. Defendant has formally requested such documentation on 3 occasions. Plaintiff has not responded. 3. Plaintiff's allegations are directly contradicted by official records. See Exhibit A, Fulton County confirmation of 0 noise complaints. Exhibit B, bank statement showing rent payment. 4. The true purpose of plaintiff's motion is to deprive defendant of adequate time to prepare a defense, not to address any genuine emergency. Wherefore, defendant respectfully requests this court deny plaintiff's motion. Respectfully submitted, Simone Ashford, Pro Se. She filed it electronically, paid the filing fee online. March 10th. The response came in 1 sentence. Order: plaintiff's motion for expedited proceedings is granted. Hearing scheduled for March 15th, 9 a.m., Fulton County Magistrate Court, Room 4B, Judge Harold Whitmire, presiding. 5 days, not 30, not even the 10 days plaintiff had requested. 5. Simone read the order 3 times. Then she opened her calendar and blocked every hour until March 15th for preparation. She had work to do. March 10th, 6:15 a.m. Her key didn't work. Simone stood in the hallway, groceries in one hand, dry cleaning over her arm, sliding her key into the lock again and again. Same key she'd used for 2 months. Same lock she'd checked just yesterday. Nothing. Down the hall, a door opened. Garrett Loomis stepped out, from an apartment that wasn't his, wearing a smile that said he'd been waiting. Locks got changed. He walked toward her slowly. Security upgrade. Whole building's getting new hardware. Georgia law prohibits lockouts during pending dispossessory proceedings. This isn't a lockout, it's a security upgrade. OCGA, Section 44-7-14.1. You have 30 minutes to provide a working key, or I file a police report and emergency motion. Garrett stopped 3 feet away, close enough that she could see the coffee stain on his collar, the stubble he'd missed shaving, the calculation happening behind his eyes. You know, he said quietly, most people, by now, they would have gotten the message. Found somewhere else to live, stopped making trouble. I'm not most people. No. He tilted his head. No, you're not. He stared at her for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone, typed something, and put it away. Maintenance will be up in 20 minutes. New key. 30 minutes is my limit. After that, I make the call. 22 minutes later, Jolene Fitch appeared with a new key. No apology, no explanation. Oh, just a key on a plain ring, dropped into Simone's palm without eye contact. Simone entered her apartment, walked through every room, checked every drawer, every cabinet, every piece of furniture. Nothing moved, nothing missing. But on her kitchen table, placed precisely in the center, a photograph of her, walking to her car in the parking lot, timestamp in the corner. March 8th, 7:34 a.m. No note, no explanation, just the message, we're watching you. She photographed the photograph, added it to her folder. Then she sat in her kitchen and didn't move for an hour. Not afraid. Thinking. March 11th. The City Housing Board met on the 2nd Tuesday of every month. Public comment period, 6 p.m. 3 minutes per speaker, strictly enforced. Simone arrived at 5:45, signed in, took a seat in the back row. The room was half empty. A few concerned citizens, a developer with a proposal, 2 reporters who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. At the front table, 5 board members, including Councilman Norris Calhoun. She'd researched him, too, 12 years on the council, chair of the Housing Subcommittee. Campaign contributors for the last election cycle included Atlanta Metro Builders Association, $3,500, Georgia Landlords Coalition, $2,800, and, listed separately, almost hidden among the smaller donations, Loomis Development, LLC, $4,700. Loomis Development, not Loomis Property Management. A separate company, same family, handling commercial real estate projects. Interesting. The meeting droned on. Zoning variances, infrastructure updates, A debate about parking requirements for a new apartment complex. Finally, public comment. Simone waited until third in line. Then she stepped to the microphone. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Simone Ashford. I'm here to raise concerns about Loomis Property Management's treatment of tenants, particularly minority tenants, in violation of the Fair Housing Act. Calhoun's expression didn't change, but his pen stopped moving. Ma'am, this board addresses policy matters, not individual disputes. If you have a legal matter, that's for the courts. I'm requesting the board examine whether this management company's complaint patterns constitute discriminatory practices under 42 U.S.C. Section 3604, B. Specifically, discriminatory terms and conditions of rental. That's a federal matter, beyond our jurisdiction. The city has authority to investigate fair housing violations within its boundaries under the Atlanta Fair Housing Ordinance. I'm requesting an inquiry. Calhoun leaned forward. His voice carried a new edge. Ms. Ashford, do you have specific evidence of discrimination? Documented patterns? Statistical analysis? I'm developing that evidence now. I'm here to put this board on notice that such evidence exists, and to request that you take appropriate action. On notice? Calhoun almost smiled. Thank you for your notice. We'll take it under advisement. He moved to the next speaker before she could respond. Simone returned to her seat. The meeting continued for another hour. Calhoun didn't look at her again, but she noticed something. As she was speaking, he'd been typing on his phone. And 45 minutes later, Garrett Loomis entered the meeting room, took a seat near the exit, and watched her until she left. March 12th. The knock came at 7 p.m. Soft, hesitant. Simone checked the peephole. An elderly woman, small, white-haired, familiar. The neighbor from 4B. Mrs. Turner. Gladys Turner, according to the mailbox. She opened the door. Ms. Ashford? The woman's voice was barely above a whisper. I'm sorry to bother you. I know we haven't formally met, but there's something I think you should know. Simone stepped aside. Please, come in. Mrs. Turner glanced down the hallway, both directions, before entering. She moved slowly, carefully, like someone used to being watched. They came to see me, she said once the door was closed. Yesterday afternoon, that Fitch woman and Mr. Loomis. What did they want? They asked about you. Mrs. Turner lowered herself onto the edge of Simone's couch. Asked if I'd heard noises from your place. Music, parties, people coming and going. What did you tell them? The truth. The old woman's eyes met hers. You're the quietest neighbor I've had in 16 years. I told them that. But they... She hesitated. They wrote something down anyway. I don't know what. But I saw Mr. Loomis smile when he did it. Simone sat down across from her. Mrs. Turner, why are you telling me this? Because I've lived in this building a long time. I've seen what they do to people. Her hands twisted in her lap. The family in 3A, the young man in 2D, the woman with the children in 4A. All of them. She stopped, looked at the floor. All of them were like you. And all of them are gone now. Like you. Simone understood what she meant. Would you be willing to write that down? What you just told me? Your observations about my tenancy? Write it down? A statement, in your own words, dated and signed. She paused, just in case. Mrs. Turner was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. I'll do it tonight, but please. She reached out, touched Simone's hand. Be careful. Mr. Loomis, he doesn't like to lose. After Mrs. Turner left, Simone sat in the growing darkness of her apartment and thought about patterns. The family in 3A, the young man in 2D, the woman with the children in 4A. How many others? How far back did it go? She opened her laptop, searched for Loomis property management complaints, found a handful of Yelp reviews, mostly negative. A few posts on local forums. A single news article from 3 years ago. Tenant advocates raise concerns about eviction patterns in transitional neighborhoods. The article mentioned Loomis by name, mentioned the building, mentioned a pattern of aggressive eviction tactics targeting long-term residents in gentrifying areas. No follow-up, no investigation, no consequences. Simone closed her laptop. Then she opened it again and searched for something else. Loomis Holdings, LLC stock price. The chart appeared on her screen, a company she knew well, in ways that Garrett Loomis couldn't possibly imagine, trading at $4.12 per share, down from $10.47 18 months ago, down 60% from its peak. Debt ratio, 340%. 3 properties already in receivership. Credit facilities maxed out. Cash reserves, approximately $2.3 million against $14.7 million in outstanding obligations. A company drowning in debt. A company desperate for cash. A company that couldn't afford to lose the revenue from a single rental unit, and certainly couldn't afford the legal costs of a prolonged tenant dispute. A company, she noted, that would be very attractive to a buyer with deep pockets and strategic patience. She closed the laptop again. March 14th, the day before court. Sterling Ames sent a settlement offer at 4 p.m. Email, not certified mail, faster, less documented. Ms. Ashford. On behalf of Loomis Property Management, I am authorized to offer the following terms for resolution of this matter. 1. You will vacate the premises within 48 hours of acceptance. 2. Your security deposit will be forfeited to cover documented damages. 3. You will sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding your tenancy and any interactions with management staff. 4. Loomis Property Management will withdraw its eviction filing. This offer represents a good faith resolution that avoids the expense and uncertainty of public proceedings. Given the strength of our documentation, Ms. Ashford, I would strongly encourage you to consider the practical challenges of contesting well-documented lease violations without legal representation. This offer expires at 5 p.m. tomorrow. Very truly yours, Sterling Ames. Simone read the offer at her kitchen table. Outside, the sun was setting. Orange lights slanted through the blinds she'd documented photographing on move-in day. She didn't respond. Instead, she opened her laptop and checked the stock ticker one more time. Loomis Holdings, LLC. Still at $4.12. Still drowning. She closed the laptop, picked up her court folder, thick now, heavy with evidence. 83 photographs, 18 certified mail receipts, 9 audio recordings, 1 notarized statement from Mrs. Gladys Turner. She laid out her exhibits on the kitchen table, organized them by category, labeled each one with a sticky note. Exhibit A, bank statement showing rent payment. Exhibit B, open records response confirming 0 noise complaints. Exhibit C, photographs of window damage with tool marks. Exhibit D, Mrs. Turner's statement. Exhibit E, text message from Garrett Loomis. Exhibit F, timeline of interactions, documenting pattern of harassment. 6 exhibits, 12 supporting documents, 4 months of evidence. She put everything back in the folder, set it by the door, set her alarm for 6 a.m. Then she slept. 8 hours, uninterrupted. March 15th, Fulton County Magistrate Court, Room 4B. The courtroom was smaller than Simone expected. Fluorescent lights, institutional carpet, rows of wooden benches like church pews. A raised platform at the front where Judge Harold Whitmire sat, reviewing papers, occasionally sipping from a mug that said, "World's Best Grandpa." Simone arrived at 8:45. Sterling Ames was already there, at the plaintiff's table, sorting documents with practiced ease. Garrett Loomis sat behind him, arms crossed, watching Simone enter. She took her seat at the defendant's table, alone, no attorney, just her folder. At 9:01, Judge Whitmire looked up. Loomis Property Management versus Ashford. Dispossessory action. Both parties present? Yes, Your Honor. Sterling Ames rose smoothly. Sterling Ames for the plaintiff. Yes, Your Honor. Simone's voice was clear. Simone Ashford, appearing pro se. The judge made a note. All right. Mr. Ames, your case. Sterling Ames presented his evidence with the practiced cadence of someone who'd done this hundreds of times. 3 noise complaints, anonymous, undated, but entered into evidence nonetheless. 1 maintenance report documenting the broken window latch. 1 payment discrepancy showing rent as unpaid for March. A system error, he acknowledged, but indicative of a pattern of payment issues. He called Jolene Fitch to testify. She took the stand, swore the oath, and delivered her lines with conviction. On February 22nd, I responded to a work order for Unit 4C. The window latch was broken. The tenant, Ms. Ashford, was present. She became verbally aggressive when I tried to document the damage. Hostile, threatening even. I felt unsafe. Sterling Ames nodded sympathetically. Ms. Fitch, in your experience as building superintendent, how would you characterize Ms. Ashford's tenancy? Problematic. Jolene didn't hesitate. Constant complaints from neighbors. Aggressive confrontations with staff. Deliberate damage to property. She's been difficult from day one. Thank you. No further questions. Judge Whitmire looked at Simone. Cross-examination? Simone stood, folder in hand. Ms. Fitch, you testified that you responded to a work order on February 22nd. Who submitted that work order? Jolene blinked. The tenant, Ms. Ashford. Can you produce a copy of that work order? Silence. Jolene looked at Sterling Ames. It's in our files. I've submitted 3 formal requests to Loomis Property Management for documentation of all maintenance requests associated with my unit. I've received no response. Can you explain that? That's not my department. Simone moved on. You testified that I was present when you entered my apartment on February 22nd. What time did you arrive? I don't remember exactly. Midday, I think. And how did you enter the apartment? Another pause. With my key. Standard procedure. Did I let you in? Jolene's eyes darted to Sterling Ames again. You weren't there when I arrived. I used my key. So you entered my apartment while I was not present? It was a maintenance call. A maintenance call I never requested. Simone pulled a document from her folder. Your Honor, I'd like to enter Exhibit C into evidence. This is a photograph of the window latch in question, time-stamped February 22nd at 4:47 p.m., several hours after Ms. Fitch claims to have completed the repair. The photograph shows fresh tool marks inconsistent with normal wear. The damage pattern suggests deliberate breakage, not tenant misuse. Sterling Ames stood. Objection. Lack of foundation. Ms. Ashford isn't a forensic expert. Judge Whitmire nodded. Sustained. The photograph is excluded. Simone didn't argue. She moved to her next exhibit. Your Honor, I'd like to enter Exhibit A into evidence. This is my bank statement showing rent payment on February 26th, 5 days before the due date. Transaction ID number ATL-4427891. Status completed. Judge Whitmire examined the document. Go ahead. And Exhibit B, a response from Fulton County to my open records request, confirming that no noise complaints have been filed for my address during my tenancy. She handed the documents to the bailiff, who passed them to the judge. Your Honor, the plaintiff's case rests on 3 allegations: noise complaints, property damage, and non-payment of rent. I've now demonstrated that 2 of those allegations are directly contradicted by official records. The third, property damage, relies on testimony from a witness who admits to entering my apartment without authorization and cannot produce documentation of the maintenance request she claims to have fulfilled. She pulled out her final exhibit. I'd also like to submit a sworn, notarized statement from Mrs. Gladys Turner, my neighbor in Unit 4B, attesting that I am, and I quote, the quietest neighbor she's had in 16 years. Sterling Ames glanced at Garrett Loomis. Something passed between them. Brief, wordless. Your Honor, Ames said, these documents don't change the fundamental facts. The plaintiff has documented legitimate concerns about the defendant's tenancy. The system discrepancy regarding rent has been acknowledged. We're not claiming non-payment, merely a pattern of communication issues. The noise complaints, while not filed with the county, were received by building management through proper channels. Anonymous channels, Simone interrupted. Undocumented, undated, unverifiable. Judge Whitmire held up a hand. Ms. Ashford, please let counsel finish. Sterling Ames continued, but Simone had stopped listening. She was watching Judge Whitmire, watching the way his eyes moved between the exhibits and Garrett Loomis, watching the way his pen had stopped moving 5 minutes ago, watching the calculation happening behind his eyes. The judge deliberated for 4 minutes. 4 minutes of silence, broken only by the scratch of pen on paper and the distant hum of the building's HVAC system. Then he looked up. The court has considered the evidence presented by both parties. While the defendant has raised some procedural concerns, the court finds that the plaintiff has demonstrated a pattern of tenant behavior inconsistent with the terms of the lease agreement. Simone's chest tightened. The court therefore finds sufficient evidence of lease violations to support dispossessory action. The defendant is ordered to vacate the premises within 14 days. Security deposit is forfeited to cover documented damages. Court costs are assessed to the defendant. The gavel came down. Behind her, Garrett Loomis exhaled, a long, satisfied breath. Simone stood, gathered her folder, nodded once to Judge Whitmire, a gesture that meant nothing and everything. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Garrett caught up to her. Should have taken the deal. His voice was low, private. Would have saved yourself the embarrassment. She turned, met his eyes. Mr. Loomis, do you know what the word Pyrrhic means? He frowned. What? A Pyrrhic victory, named after King Pyrrhus of Epirus. It means winning a battle at such a cost that the victory is essentially a defeat. She walked away before he could respond. In the parking lot, sitting in her modest sedan, she made a phone call. It's done. Her voice was calm, controlled. Ruling went against me. 14 days to vacate. The voice on the other end was equally calm. Are you all right? I'm fine. They showed exactly who they are. On the record, under oath. Then we proceed? Simone looked at the courthouse. 3rd floor, room 4B, where Judge Harold Whitmire was probably already hearing his next case, already forgetting her name. We proceed. She started the car. Initiate phase 2. Want to see what happens when Simone reveals her true identity? Follow along in part 2. March 18th, 3 days after the ruling. Simone filed her HUD complaint at 8:45 a.m., electronically, through the Department of Housing and Urban Development's online portal. Complaint number ATL-2024-0892. Allegation: discriminatory housing practices in violation of 42 U.S.C., Section 3604. The complaint was detailed. Thorough. 12 pages of narrative supported by 47 exhibits. It alleged a pattern of harassment targeting minority tenants. It documented the noise complaints that didn't exist, the maintenance requests that were never made, the unlawful entries, the lockout attempt, the surveillance photograph left on her kitchen table. It named Garrett Loomis, Jolene Fitch, Sterling Ames, Loomis Property Management, LLC, and, in a separate section, Councilman Norris Calhoun, whose campaign contributions from Loomis-affiliated entities suggested potential conflicts of interest in his dismissal of her concerns at the Housing Board meeting. The complaint was received at 8:47 a.m. By 8:48 a.m., Simone had moved on to her next filing. The Georgia Real Estate Commission. Complaint number GREC 4471. Allegation: unlawful lockout attempts, falsified maintenance records, and violations of OCGA Section 44-7-14.1. This one was shorter, 8 pages, but equally documented. The lockout on March 10th. The photograph left as intimidation. The fabricated work orders. The coordination between Garrett and Jolene. filed at 9:03 a.m. And finally, a referral to the Fulton County District Attorney's Office, forwarded through proper channels, a letter to the Chief of the Criminal Division, CC'd to the Public Integrity Unit. Allegation: potential perjury in sworn testimony. Specifically, Jolene Fitch's statement that Simone had been present and verbally aggressive during a maintenance visit on February 22nd, a statement directly contradicted by evidence showing Simone was not home during the relevant time period. The referral was careful to note that it was not a formal criminal complaint, just a request for review. Simone was not a prosecutor. She couldn't press charges. But she could put the information in front of someone who could. By 9:30 a.m., all 3 filings were complete. Simone sat in her apartment, the apartment she had 14 days to vacate, and looked at the folder on her kitchen table. Thicker now than it had ever been, but not complete. Not yet. She opened her laptop, checked her email. One new message. Subject line: RE, Acquisition Timeline. Phase 2 authorization confirmed. Proceed at your discretion. She closed the laptop. Then she began to pack. March 28th. Simone vacated Unit 4C 13 days after the court ruling, 1 day ahead of the deadline. She did it deliberately, methodically, the same way she'd done everything else. Every room photographed before she removed a single item. Every surface wiped clean after. The window with the broken latch, repaired at her own expense, receipt documented. The walls patched where she'd hung 2 photographs. The carpet professionally cleaned, even though it hadn't needed cleaning. She left the apartment in better condition than she'd found it. And she documented that too. The final walkthrough happened at 9 a.m. Garrett Loomis arrived with Jolene Fitch and a clipboard full of damage assessments they'd clearly prepared in advance. Let's see. Garrett walked slowly through the empty unit. Walls look scuffed. That's going to be $200 to repaint. Carpet's worn. The carpet was professionally cleaned 3 days ago. Here's the receipt. Carpet's worn in high traffic areas. Another $150 for replacement. The carpet showed identical wear patterns when I moved in. Here are the photographs from January 7th. Garrett's jaw tightened. He continued his inspection, bathroom, bedroom, kitchen, finding fault with everything, documenting nothing legitimate. When he finished, he turned to face her. "You know," he said, "I've been doing this a long time, longer than you've been alive, probably, and I've seen your type before." "My type?" "People who think they're smarter than everyone else, who think their documentation and their photographs and their legal mumbo-jumbo are going to protect them." He stepped closer. "But here's the thing. In the end, people like you always lose. Because people like me, we own the game." Simone held his gaze. "Mr. Loomis, I have one question for you." "What's that?" "When you look at your company's stock price, $4.12 per share, down 60% from last year, do you ever wonder who's buying up all those shares?" His expression flickered, just for a moment. "What the hell are you talking about?" She didn't answer. She picked up the last of her boxes, a small one containing only her folder, and walked to the door. "Goodbye, Mr. Loomis. I'll see you soon." The door closed behind her. April 7th, Hartsfield Tower, 17th floor. Conference room 17C. The closing was scheduled for 10 a.m. Simone arrived at 9:45. She wore a different outfit today, not the simple blouses and practical shoes she'd worn as a tenant. Today, a tailored navy suit, silk blouse, heels that clicked on the marble floor, a leather portfolio under her arm, a watch that cost more than 6 months' rent at Unit 4C. The receptionist looked up, smiled politely. "Welcome to Whitfield & Associates. Do you have an appointment?" "Yes, the Apex Capital closing. I'm here for the Loomis Holdings acquisition." "Of course. Conference room 17C. The other parties are already waiting." Simone walked down the hallway. Marble floors, glass walls. The kind of office that announced its success before you ever saw a business card. Conference room 17C. She paused outside the door, took a breath, then pushed it open. The room was large. Long table, polished to a mirror finish. At the far end, Marcus Loomis, 71 years old, founder of Loomis Holdings, patriarch of the family. Silver hair, liver-spotted hands, the face of a man who'd been winning for 5 decades. Beside him, Garrett Loomis, arms crossed, foot tapping. Already irritated, probably by the 45-minute wait. Beside Garrett, Sterling Ames, legal pad out, pen ready, the professional mask firmly in place. At the head of the table, an empty chair, for the apex representative who hadn't yet arrived. Simone walked to that chair. "Good morning," her voice carried across the room. "Shall we begin?" Marcus Loomis looked up, frowned. "I'm sorry, who are you?" "I'm the apex representative. We were expecting..." He checked his notes. "We were told the representative would be..." "Would be what, Mr. Loomis?" Silence. Garrett was staring at her now. The confusion on his face was transforming into something else. Recognition. Horror. "Wait!" His voice came out strangled. "Wait. You're the..." Simone reached into her portfolio, pulled out a business card, slid it across the table. Simone Ashford, Managing Director, Apex Capital Partners, Distressed Assets Division. "Ms. Ashford," Marcus Loomis said slowly, "is a common name. Surely this is a coincidence." Simone pulled out another document, SEC filing, Form 8K, dated March 18th. Apex Capital Partners announces definitive agreement to acquire 100% of Loomis Holdings, LLC, in an all-cash transaction valued at $12.4 million. The transaction is expected to close within 30 days, pending standard regulatory review. She looked at Garrett. "The filing was made 3 days after your eviction ruling, the same day I filed my HUD complaint." She paused. "Did you ever wonder why I didn't fight harder in court? Why I accepted the ruling so quietly?" Garrett's mouth opened, closed, opened again. This is some kind of trick." "No, Mr. Loomis. This is a hostile acquisition." She pulled out another document. Section 4.2 of the acquisition agreement. All management personnel are subject to review within 90 days of closing. Performance evaluations, background checks, compliance audits. She slid the document across the table. "I'll be conducting those reviews personally." End of Part 1. Word count, approximately 9,800 words. Viet tiep chatoy fan hai, hoang mui mot ngin nam cham tu, nội dung liên mạch cho đến hết câu chuyện. 1535, orchestrated narrative continuation mapping reveal, confrontation, investigation, and resolution sequences. The user wants me to continue writing Part 2 of the story, approximately 11,500 words, seamlessly continuing from where Part 1 ended until the conclusion of the story. Let me review the outline to ensure I follow the structure. Part 6, Reveal plus Showdown, approximately 4,000 to 4,302. Scene 6.1, 3 weeks later, the closing, already partially covered in Part 1 ending. Scene 6.2, the receipts cascade. Scene 6.3, Marcus Loomis negotiates. Scene 6.4, HUD, investigation update. Scene 6.5, Fulton County, the perjury question. Scene 6.6, the building under new management. Part 7, Kep Mo, Quang Mot Ngin Sao Trum, Den Mot Ngin Chin Trum 2. Scene 7.1, 6 months later, status update. Scene 7.2, the unresolved thread. Scene 7.3, Councilman Calhoun's quiet exit scene. 7.4, the phone call. Scene 7.5, stinger. I need to 1. Continue from the closing scene where Simone just revealed herself. 2. Show the receipts cascade. 3. Marcus negotiating. 4. HUD investigation. 5. Perjury. Question resolution. 6. Building under new management. 7. 6 months later status. 8. Unresolved threads, 9. Councilman exit 10. Phone call with journalist 11. Stinger ending. Also need to add 3 to 5 physical confrontation scenes, slaps, punches, shoving, etc. Include 3 CT, as follow the dialogue format, no name format. Keep narration 80 to 92%, dialogue less than or equal to 8 to 20%. Maintain legal accuracy and realistic outcomes with partial victories. Leave 1 to 2 unresolved threads for narrative tension. Let me write this continuation. Show more. Done. Landlord evicted black woman in court. Then she bought the entire building cash von high. The silence in the conference room stretched for 10 seconds, 15, 20. Marcus Loomis sat perfectly still, his liver-spotted hands flat on the polished table. Sterling Ames had stopped writing mid-word, pen frozen above his legal pad. And Garrett looked like a man watching his own execution. "This is insane," Garrett's voice cracked on the second word. "You can't." "I can." Simone opened her portfolio and removed a second folder, thicker than the first. "And I have. The acquisition closed this morning at 9:15 a.m. Eastern Time. Your company's board of directors, all 3 of them, signed the transfer documents 45 minutes ago." She slid a stack of papers across the table. Signature pages. Notarized. Witnessed. Legal. Marcus Loomis picked up the top page. Read it slowly. His face didn't change, but his hands, those liver-spotted hands that had signed 1,000 deals over 5 decades, began to tremble. How? It wasn't a question. More like a sound escaping against his will. Your company was drowning. Simone's voice remained calm, professional, the voice of someone explaining quarterly earnings to a board of directors. Debt ratio of 340%, 3 properties already in receivership, credit facilities maxed out, cash reserves insufficient to cover 6 months of operating expenses. She pulled out another document. Apex Capital Partners specializes in distressed assets. We've been monitoring Loomis Holdings for 18 months. When your stock dropped below $5 per share, we began accumulating a position, quietly, through shell companies, through third-party investors who owed us favors. She looked at Marcus Loomis. By February of this year, we controlled 31% of your outstanding shares. Enough to force a board meeting, enough to demand an audit, enough to make your remaining investors very, very nervous. Marcus Loomis set down the document. You planned this. His voice was quiet now. Dangerous. You moved into my building. You provoked my son. I documented your son's behavior. Simone cut him off. I documented illegal entries, fabricated complaints, perjured testimony, a systematic campaign of harassment designed to force out a tenant whose only crime was existing while black in a building you wanted to gentrify. She pulled out another folder. This one was red. Your Honor. She caught herself. Old habit. Mr. Loomis, before we proceed with the transition, there are some additional matters that will affect our planning. Garrett stood up so fast his chair crashed backward. This is entrapment. She set us up. She moved in specifically to... Garrett. Marcus Loomis's voice cracked like a whip. Sit down. But Dad, sit down. Garrett sat. His face had gone from pale to red, the flush creeping up his neck like a rash. Simone waited until he was seated. Then she opened the red folder. On March 16th, 1 day after your eviction ruling, I filed a complaint with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, complaint number ATL 202-40892. Allegation: discriminatory housing practices in violation of 42 U.S.C. Section 3604. She slid the complaint across the table. The complaint documents a pattern of harassment targeting minority tenants. Fabricated noise complaints, unlawful entries, intimidation tactics, coordinated false testimony. She pulled out another document. On March 20th, I filed a separate complaint with the Georgia Real Estate Commission, complaint number GREC 4471. Allegations: unlawful lockout attempts, falsified maintenance records, violations of OCGA Section 44-7-14.1. Another document joined the pile. And on March 22nd, I forwarded a referral to the Fulton County District Attorney's Office for review of potential perjury in sworn testimony, specifically Ms. Jolene Fitch's statements regarding events on February 22nd. Sterling Ames finally spoke. His voice was thin, careful. These complaints are retaliatory, filed after an adverse court ruling. They'll be dismissed as a disgruntled tenant's attempt to... Perhaps. Simone didn't look at him. But the discovery process will require production of all tenant complaint records for the past 5 years, maintenance logs, communication records, personnel files. She paused. I suspect the pattern will be notable. Marcus Loomis had been reading the HUD complaint. Now he looked up. What do you want? The question hung in the air. Direct, unvarnished. The question of a man who understood leverage, who had spent 50 years learning when to fight and when to negotiate. Simone closed her portfolio. The acquisition proceeds as agreed. Your son resigns from all management positions effective immediately, today before we leave this room. Ms. Fitch's employment is terminated for cause, and the company cooperates fully with HUD's investigation. Marcus Loomis didn't blink. And if we refuse? The acquisition agreement contains a material adverse change clause. Evidence of systematic fair housing violations would qualify as a material adverse change. Apex withdraws from the transaction. Your debt holders accelerate their loans. Loomis Holdings enters receivership within 60 days. She leaned forward slightly. You'll lose everything, Mr. Loomis. The buildings, the company, the family name attached to 40 years of work. And you'll lose it publicly in a bankruptcy proceeding that will make every newspaper in Atlanta. Silence. Garrett was shaking now. Not from fear, from rage. His hands gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles had gone white. You can't do this. His voice was barely controlled. You can't just... I can. Simone met his eyes. I am. Marcus Loomis raised a hand. Garrett fell silent. Ms. Ashford. The old man's voice was measured, careful. You've clearly put considerable thought into this arrangement, but I wonder if you've considered all the implications. Such as? My son has managed this property for 12 years. He knows the tenants. He knows the systems. He knows how to fabricate complaints. He knows how to intimidate elderly women into silence. He knows how to coordinate perjured testimony with his superintendent. Simone's voice didn't rise, but it hardened. That's not institutional knowledge, Mr. Loomis. That's evidence. Garrett slammed his palm on the table. I've had enough of this. He stood again, moved around the table, fast, aggressive. Before anyone could react, he was standing over Simone, one hand raised. She didn't flinch. Touch me, she said quietly, and this meeting becomes an assault case. There are cameras in this building, witnesses in the lobby, and my attorney. She glanced at her phone, sitting face up on the table. Is listening to every word through an open line. Garrett's hand hung in the air, frozen. Garrett. Marcus Loomis's voice was ice. Step away. For a long moment, Garrett didn't move. His breath came hard and fast, his face twisted with a rage that seemed to have no outlet. Then, slowly, he lowered his hand. This isn't over. No. Simone stood, gathered her documents. It's not, but your involvement in it is. She looked at Marcus Loomis. You have until 5 p.m. today to deliver your son's signed resignation. I'll be at the Apex offices downtown. You know the address. She walked to the door, paused with her hand on the handle. One more thing, Mr. Loomis. Marcus looked up. The tenant in 4B, Mrs. Gladys Turner, 74 years old, lived in that building for 16 years. Simone's voice softened, just slightly. She told me about the others, the family in 3A, the young man in 2D, the woman with the children in 4A, all of them like me, all of them gone now. She opened the door. I remember their names, even if you don't. If you're enjoying Simone's satisfying revenge, subscribe and hit the like button to support us. The resignation arrived at 4:47 p.m., hand-delivered by Sterling Ames himself, who looked like a man attending his own funeral. The document was brief, 3 paragraphs, standard language, effective immediately. Simone read it twice, checked the signature, checked the notarization. And Ms. Fitch? Sterling Ames reached into his briefcase, pulled out a second document. Terminated this afternoon, for cause, per your request. Per the terms of the acquisition agreement, Simone corrected him mildly, which I assume you reviewed before your client signed. Sterling Ames said nothing. You may go, Mr. Ames. He left without another word. Simone sat in her office, a corner suite on the 32nd floor of the Apex building, with a view of downtown Atlanta that stretched to the horizon, and allowed herself one moment of satisfaction. Then she opened her laptop and got back to work. The HUD investigation would take months, maybe years. Federal bureaucracy moved at its own pace, indifferent to the urgencies of individuals. But it would move, and when it did, it would find what she'd documented. The patterns, the targets, the system. She pulled up the complaint file, added a note to the timeline. April 7th, acquisition closed. G. Loomis resigned. J. Fitch terminated. Then she opened a new document. Subject, compliance review, Loomis Holdings Properties. The real work was just beginning. 3 weeks later. The letter arrived on Simone's desk at 9:15 a.m., forwarded from the HUD regional office in Atlanta. Official letterhead, reference number in the corner, the bureaucratic machinery grinding forward one document at a time. RE, complaint number ATL-2024-0892. Dear Ms. Ashford, the Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity has completed its preliminary review of your complaint dated March 16th, Divi Tukstoshi Divdesmit Chetri. Based on the documentation provided, including tenant records, maintenance logs, and communication records obtained through our investigation, the department finds reasonable cause to believe that discriminatory housing practices occurred at the property located at 2847 Collier Road Northwest, Atlanta, Georgia. Pursuant to 42 U.S.C. Section 3610G, this matter is hereby referred to conciliation. A HUD conciliator will contact you within 30 days to schedule an initial meeting with all parties. Please note that a finding of reasonable cause is not a final determination of liability. The purpose of conciliation is to resolve the complaint through mutual agreement, without the necessity of formal adjudication. Sincerely, Director, Atlanta Regional Office, U.S., Department of Housing and Urban Development. Simone read the letter 3 times. Reasonable cause. 2 words that carried more weight than they appeared to. Reasonable cause meant the federal government believed her documentation, believed her pattern. Conciliation meant negotiation, not criminal referral, not prison sentences, just negotiation. She'd expected this. The system rarely punished its own. It preferred quiet settlements, consent decrees, agreements that allowed everyone to claim victory while changing nothing fundamental. But conciliation also meant records, official records, records that would follow Loomis Property Management, now an Apex subsidiary, for years, records that future tenants could reference, records that journalists could cite, records that couldn't be erased. She filed the letter in her folder, added it to the timeline. May 3rd. HUD finds reasonable cause. Conciliation scheduled. Then she made a phone call. We got the letter. Her voice was calm, satisfied, but not triumphant. Reasonable cause. Conciliation within 30 days. The voice on the other end, her attorney, a partner at one of Atlanta's largest firms, responded with equal calm. Expected. What's your goal for conciliation? Policy changes, third-party monitoring, financial penalties paid to a fair housing fund, not to me personally. She paused. And a public acknowledgement, something on the record. They'll resist the public acknowledgement. They always do. I know, but I have leverage they don't know about yet. The other complaints? The other tenants. Simone looked out her window at the Atlanta skyline. Mrs. Turner wasn't the only one willing to talk. I've found 4 others, former tenants, 2019 through 2023. All minority, all evicted under similar circumstances, all willing to provide statements. Silence on the line. Simone, if you're building a class action, I'm not. I'm building a pattern. For the conciliation. For the record. She turned away from the window. I don't want their money. I want their practices documented, exposed, changed. That's unusually principled for someone who just executed a hostile takeover. Simone almost smiled. The takeover was business. This is personal. The perjury referral went nowhere. Simone learned this on May 15th through a form letter from the Fulton County District Attorney's Office. 3 paragraphs of bureaucratic language that boiled down to 2 words: insufficient evidence. Dear Ms. Ashford, thank you for your correspondence dated March 22nd regarding potential perjury in case number 24, CV1147. After careful review of the materials provided, this office has determined that the evidence does not meet the standard required for criminal prosecution under OCGA, Section 16-10-70. Specifically, the discrepancies noted in the sworn testimony of Ms. Jolene Fitch, while concerning, do not rise to the level of willful false statement required for a perjury charge. We appreciate your diligence in bringing this matter to our attention. This office remains committed to the pursuit of justice in all cases where sufficient evidence exists. Sincerely, Chief, Criminal Division, Fulton County District Attorney's Office. Simone read the letter once. Then she filed it. She'd expected this too. Perjury cases were notoriously difficult to prosecute, proving that someone knowingly lied rather than simply misremembered or exaggerated required evidence that rarely existed, and district attorneys, facing budget constraints and overwhelming caseloads, rarely pursued charges against witnesses in civil matters. The system protected its own. Always had, always would. But Jolene Fitch's termination stood, and her name, along with the substance of the allegations, now appeared in the HUD file. Publicly accessible, permanently recorded. Future employers would find it. Future background checks would flag it. The consequences might not be criminal, but they would be real. Simone added the letter to her timeline. May 15th. DA declines prosecution. Administrative consequences remain. Then she moved on. The building. May 20th. Simone walked through the property, now officially Apex Portfolio Property number 47, for the first time since her eviction. New management had been in place for 6 weeks. New policies. New procedures. The hallways looked the same. Same industrial carpet. Same fluorescent lights. Same faint smell of cooking and cleaning products that marked every apartment building in every city. But something had changed. Mrs. Gladys Turner met her at the elevator, 74 years old, white-haired, still moving slowly, but with something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Ms. Ashford. She said the name like it meant something now. I didn't believe it when they told me that you owned. My company owns the building. Simone's voice was gentle. Not me personally, but I oversee the properties in this portfolio, which means I oversee this one. They walked together down the hall, past 4A, where a young couple had moved in last month, the first new tenant since the acquisition. Past 4C, still empty, still being renovated. I keep expecting Mr. Loomis to come around the corner. Mrs. Turner's voice was quiet. 12 years he was here. 12 years of looking over your shoulder, wondering what complaint he'd invent next, what lie he'd put in the file. He won't be back. I know, but the feeling... She stopped at her door. 4B. The same door she'd opened 11 weeks ago to warn Simone. The feeling takes longer to leave than the person. Simone nodded. She understood. Mrs. Turner, I want you to have something. She reached into her portfolio, pulled out a document. This is your new lease. 2-year fixed term. Rent unchanged from your current rate. No month-to-month uncertainty. No annual increases unless required by law. Mrs. Turner took the document, read it slowly. Her hands trembled, but not from fear this time. Why? The word came out thick. Why would you, after everything? Because you told the truth. Simone's voice was soft. When it would have been easier to stay silent. When it might have cost you your home. She paused. That's worth protecting. Mrs. Turner looked up, tears in her eyes now, making no effort to hide them. You're not like them. It wasn't a question. I thought, when you first moved in, I thought you were just another tenant. Another person they'd grind down until you left. I am just another tenant. Simone smiled slightly. One who happened to have resources they didn't expect. She reached into her portfolio again, pulled out a business card. Atlanta Legal Aid Society. Tenant Rights Hotline. For the next time, she said, for anyone who needs it. Mrs. Turner took the card, held it like it was precious. Miss Ashford, that woman, the superintendent, Miss Fitch. Her voice dropped. She came by last week, after she lost her job. She was angry, said things, threatened things. Simone's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes hardened. What kind of threats? She said... Mrs. Turner hesitated. She said you'd ruined her life. Said she knew people. Said she'd make sure you regretted it. Did she say anything specific? Names? Dates? No, just anger. A lot of anger. Simone nodded, made a mental note. Thank you for telling me. If she comes back, if anyone from the old management contacts you, please let me know immediately. The new property manager has my direct number. Mrs. Turner nodded, clutched the business card. Be careful, she said. People like that, they don't forgive. Neither do I. June 3rd. The confrontation happened in the parking lot. Simone had just finished a walkthrough of the property, monthly inspections, part of her new oversight protocol, and was heading to her car when the voice cut across the pavement. There she is! Jolene Fitch stood by the dumpster enclosure, changed since Simone had last seen her. Thinner, harder, the lines around her mouth deeper. She wore jeans and a stained sweatshirt, a far cry from the work uniform she'd worn as superintendent. Beside her, Garrett Loomis, also changed. The polo shirts and property manager swagger replaced by something rawer, more desperate. Simone stopped, kept her distance. Mr. Loomis, Ms. Fitch, you're both aware that you're no longer authorized to be on this property. Garrett laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Authorized, listen to her, like she owns the place. He stepped forward. Oh wait, she does. Because she lied her way in here. Set us up, destroyed everything my family built. Your family built a system of harassment and discrimination. I documented it. There's a difference. Jolene moved to Garrett's left, flanking. The positioning wasn't accidental. You know what you cost me? Jolene's voice shook with fury. 12 years I worked this building. 12 years. And now I can't get hired anywhere. Can't even get an interview. Because your name, your complaint, shows up every time someone runs a background check. Your actions show up. Simone's voice remained level. I documented what you did. The fabricated work orders, the perjured testimony. Those are your choices, Ms. Fitch, not mine. Garrett took another step forward. Close enough now that Simone could see the blood vessels in his eyes, the sour smell of alcohol on his breath. You think you're so smart. His voice dropped to something close to a growl. You think your money and your lawyers and your documentation make you untouchable. I think you should leave before I call the police." "The police?" Garrett laughed again. "Lady, I know half the cops in this precinct. You think they're gonna take your side over mine?" He moved fast. His hand shot out, grabbed Simone's arm, fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. She didn't cry out, didn't give him the satisfaction, but the pain was sharp and immediate. "Let me tell you something." His face was inches from hers now. "This isn't over. You took my job. Oh, my reputation, my family's company. You think I'm just gonna—" Simone's free hand moved. Not a punch. She wasn't trained for that, wasn't built for physical confrontation. But her palm came up fast, heel of the hand connecting with Garrett's chin, snapping his head back. He released her arm, stumbled backward. "Assault." Simone's voice was cold now. Controlled, but cold. "That's what you just committed. In front of a witness." She pointed to the security camera mounted on the building's corner, the red light blinking steadily. "And that camera, installed last month as part of the new management protocols, just recorded everything." Garrett touched his jaw, stared at her with a mix of rage and dawning realization. If you ever touch me again, if you ever come within 100 feet of this property, I will have you arrested, and I will prosecute. Personally." She pulled out her phone, dialed. "This is Simone Ashford, Apex Capital Partners. I need to report a trespass and assault at 2847 Collier Road. 2 individuals, both previously terminated from employment here. Yes, I have video. Yes, I'll wait." Garrett and Jolene exchanged a look. Then, without another word, they turned and walked toward the parking lot exit. Fast, almost running. Simone watched them go. Her arm throbbed where Garrett had grabbed her. There would be bruises tomorrow, 5 distinct marks, 1 for each finger. She photographed them anyway. Documentation. Always documentation. This satisfying story is getting intense. Like and subscribe to see how it all ends. The conciliation hearing happened on June 15th, HUD Regional Office, 3rd floor. Conference room with no windows and too much fluorescent lighting. The kind of room where deals were made and principles were compromised, all in the name of resolution. Simone arrived at 9:45. Her attorney, David Okonkwo, senior partner at Morris & Associates, sat beside her, briefcase open, legal pad ready. Across the table, Marcus Loomis, looking older than he had 2 months ago. Sterling Ames, professional mask firmly in place. And a new face. Angela Whitfield, outside counsel brought in specifically for the HUD matter, a specialist in fair housing defense. At the head of the table, the HUD conciliator, a middle-aged woman named Patricia Vance, who looked like she'd seen every kind of housing dispute imaginable and been impressed by none of them. "Let's begin." Patricia opened a folder. "The purpose of this session is to explore the possibility of voluntary resolution without formal adjudication. Both parties have received copies of the complaint and the preliminary findings. Ms. Ashford, you're the complainant. Would you like to summarize your position?" Simone nodded. The complaint documents a pattern of discriminatory housing practices targeting minority tenants at 2847 Collier Road. Over a 4-year period, 2020 through 2024, at least 6 tenants of color were subjected to fabricated complaints, unlawful entries, and coordinated harassment designed to force them out of their homes. She opened her own folder. "I've provided statements from 4 of those former tenants, in addition to my own experience. I've also provided documentation showing that complaints and maintenance issues affecting white tenants were resolved without similar escalation." Patricia made a note. "And your goals for resolution?" 3 things. First, policy changes, specifically third-party oversight of tenant complaints and eviction proceedings for a period of 3 years. Second, financial penalties. I propose $180,000 paid to a fair housing fund, not to me personally. Third, a public acknowledgement that discriminatory practices occurred. Angela Whitfield shook her head. The third point is a non-starter. My client is prepared to discuss policy changes and even financial penalties, but any public acknowledgement would expose them to additional litigation and reputational harm. The reputational harm already exists. Simone's voice remained calm. The HUD finding of reasonable cause is public record. The question is whether your client wants to be seen as acknowledging the problem and making changes, or as denying reality in the face of evidence. Sterling Ames leaned forward. Ms. Ashford, let's be frank. You now control Loomis Holdings through your company's acquisition. Any penalties or policy changes you're demanding will ultimately affect your own investment. This is unusual, to say the least. It's principled. Simone met his eyes. The acquisition was a business decision. This complaint is about accountability. I don't benefit personally from the financial penalty. It goes to a fair housing fund. I don't benefit from the policy changes. They protect future tenants, not me, and I don't benefit from the public acknowledgement, except in knowing that the truth is on the record. Patricia Vance looked between the parties. Let's take these points one at a time. Policy changes. Ms. Whitfield, is your client prepared to accept third-party oversight? Angela Whitfield conferred quietly with Marcus Loomis. Then, we can discuss oversight for a period of 18 months, not 3 years, and the scope would need to be limited to formal eviction proceedings, not all tenant complaints. 2 years, Simone countered. And the scope includes any complaint that results in documentation in a tenant's file. More conferring. Acceptable in principle. Patricia nodded. Financial penalty. Ms. Ashford proposes $180,000 over 3 years. Ms. Whitfield? That figure is excessive. The documented harm affects a small number of tenants, and the company has already terminated the employees responsible. We propose $75,000, paid to a general housing fund administered by HUD. The documented harm affects 6 tenants that I've identified. Simone's voice hardened slightly. Mrs. Turner told me there were others, going back years, who left without filing complaints, without documentation, without anyone believing them. The $180,000 reflects that broader pattern, not just the cases I can prove. David Okonkwo spoke for the first time. There's also the matter of the assault on June 3rd. Mr. Garrett Loomis, who was employed by the respondent company until April of this year, physically attacked Miss Ashford in the parking lot of the subject property. We have video evidence. We filed a police report. If this conciliation fails, that incident will be included in any subsequent litigation. Silence. Marcus Loomis's face had gone pale. I was not aware. He turned to Sterling Ames. You didn't tell me about this. I wasn't informed. Your son assaulted the complainant. David's voice was ice. Grabbed her arm, left bruises, threatened her, all on camera. The only reason we haven't pursued criminal charges is because Ms. Ashford believes in resolution over retribution, but that belief has limits. The room was very quiet. Patricia Vance cleared her throat. Given this new information, I suggest we take a 15-minute recess. The recess lasted 45 minutes. When it ended, the terms had changed. $180,000 over 3 years, accepted. Third-party oversight for 2 years, accepted. Public acknowledgement, still contested, but Marcus Loomis had agreed to language stating that the company acknowledges that certain practices during the relevant period fell short of fair housing standards and commits to ensuring such practices do not recur. Not an admission of discrimination, but close. Close enough. Patricia Vance drafted the consent decree that afternoon. Both parties signed. The system hadn't delivered justice, but it had delivered something. A record, an acknowledgement, a framework for change. Simone walked out of the HUD office at 4:15 p.m., consent decree in her portfolio, and allowed herself one moment of satisfaction. Then she got back to work. October 1st, 6 months after the eviction ruling. The consent decree was in effect. The third-party monitor, an independent consulting firm specializing in fair housing compliance, had completed its first quarterly review. Finding no violations observed during the reporting period, policies and procedures consistent with fair housing requirements. Progress. Slow, incremental, but real. Simone sat in her corner office, reviewing the quarterly report, when her phone buzzed. Text from Mrs. Turner. News van outside the building. Reporter asking questions about Loomis. Thought you should know. Simone closed the report, checked her calendar. Nothing scheduled for the afternoon. She picked up her desk phone, dialed. David, there's a journalist poking around the Collier Road property. Can you find out who and why? The answer came back within the hour. Morris Weber. Investigative Unit, Channel 5 Atlanta. 3 Emmy nominations for local journalism. Currently working on a series about housing discrimination in gentrifying neighborhoods. Simone read the biography twice. Then she made a decision. The phone rang at 8:47 p.m. Ms. Ashford, this is Morris Weber, Investigative Unit, Channel 5. I apologize for calling so late. I've been reviewing HUD filings in Fulton County, and your name appears on a complaint that caught my attention. Would you be willing to discuss your experience on camera? Simone set down the book she'd been reading. Mr. Weber, what specifically caught your attention? Honestly, the pattern. Your complaint documents practices going back several years, affecting multiple tenants. And then there's the unusual resolution. You filed the complaint against a company that you subsequently acquired. That's not something I've seen before. I filed the complaint against practices, not against a company. The acquisition was a separate business matter. But you understand how it looks. Some people might say you engineered the entire thing, moved into the building, provoked a confrontation, used the legal process to drive down the company's value before buying it. Simone was quiet for a moment. Mr. Weber, do you know how many black families were pushed out of that building between 2020 and 2024? Your complaint mentions 6. That's how many I could document. Mrs. Turner, the elderly woman in 4B, told me there were more, going back years. Families who couldn't afford lawyers, couldn't afford to fight, couldn't afford to do anything except leave quietly and hope the system that failed them wouldn't follow them to their next home. She paused. I had resources those families didn't have. I had documentation skills. I had legal knowledge. And yes, I had money. Enough to buy the company that was destroying their lives. Some people might call that engineering. I call it leverage. The same leverage that people like Garrett Loomis use every day against people who can't fight back. Silence on the line. Would you say that on camera? Simone checked her calendar again. Saturday, 10 a.m. Bring a hard drive. A hard drive? I have documentation. Time-stamped photographs, bank records, correspondence, court filings, audio recordings, everything that proves what happened in that building. How much documentation? 412 pages. More silence. I'll be there. The interview happened on Saturday. Morris Weber arrived with a camera operator and a producer. 3 people. Minimal footprint. Professional but not intrusive. They set up in Simone's living room. Natural light from the windows. No artificial staging. The interview lasted 2 hours. Simone walked through everything. The move-in, the inspections, the fabricated complaints, the unlawful entries, the broken window latch, the lockout attempt, the photograph left on her kitchen table, the eviction hearing, the ruling, and then the acquisition, the HUD complaint, the consent decree, the changes. Morris asked hard questions about her motivations, about the timing, about whether she'd planned the entire thing from the beginning. She answered honestly. I didn't plan to buy the company when I moved in. I planned to document what was happening, to build a case, to use the legal system the way it's supposed to be used, to hold people accountable for discrimination. But you did buy the company. I bought the company because it was failing, because the same practices that drove out tenants were also driving away investors, because Garrett Loomis and his father built their business on exploitation, and exploitation isn't sustainable. Some would say you took advantage of their vulnerability. Simone nodded slowly, Some would. But I'd ask those people, who was more vulnerable? A multi-million-dollar property company with lawyers and political connections and a system designed to protect them? Or the families they pushed out of their homes with fabricated complaints and perjured testimony? She leaned forward. I had leverage. I used it, the same way they used their leverage against tenants who couldn't fight back. The difference is, I used it to stop the harm. They used it to cause it. The story aired 3 weeks later. 18 minutes on the evening news. Excerpts from the interview, footage of the building, statements from Mrs. Turner and 2 other former tenants who'd agreed to speak on camera. The piece was balanced. It included responses from Sterling Ames. The company has always been committed to fair housing principles, and even a brief statement from Councilman Calhoun. Housing policy is complex, and individual disputes don't reflect broader patterns. But the evidence spoke for itself. The fabricated complaints, the unlawful entries, the coordinated harassment, all documented, all on the record. The story was picked up by 3 national outlets within 48 hours. Housing advocates shared it on social media. Law school professors added it to their curricula. And in Atlanta, something shifted. The City Housing Board announced a review of complaint procedures for rental properties. The mayor's office issued a statement supporting stronger fair housing enforcement. 2 other property management companies, facing similar allegations, reached out to HUD to discuss preemptive compliance agreements. Small changes, incremental, nothing that would transform the system overnight. But foundations, building blocks, the beginning of something. November 15th. Councilman Norris Calhoun announced that he would not seek re-election. The press release cited family priorities and a desire to spend more time with grandchildren. No mention of housing complaints. No mention of campaign contributions from Loomis-affiliated entities. No mention of the Channel 5 story that had aired 3 weeks earlier. Simone read the announcement in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Brief article, buried on page 6. No investigation, no follow-up, just a quiet exit from public life. She'd filed an open records request for Calhoun's campaign finance records back in April. The response had taken 4 months, delays, extensions, partial releases. But eventually, she'd gotten what she needed. 17 contributions from Loomis-affiliated entities over 4 years, $43,700 total, all legal, all disclosed, all perfectly within the bounds of Georgia campaign finance law. But the pattern was there. The connection. The reason Calhoun had dismissed her concerns at the housing board meeting, had moved to the next speaker before she could respond, had typed on his phone while she was talking, and why Garrett Loomis had appeared at that same meeting 45 minutes later. She couldn't prove quid pro quo, couldn't prove anything beyond circumstantial connection. But she could document, could compile, could ensure that the next journalist who looked into Calhoun's record would find the breadcrumbs she'd left. Some threads never surfaced, but they could be preserved for the next person who needed them. December 1st, the Georgia Real Estate Commission issued its final ruling on complaint number GREC 4471. 1 paragraph, 3 sentences. After review of the materials submitted, the Commission finds that respondent Garrett Loomis engaged in conduct inconsistent with the professional standards expected of licensed property managers. A letter of reprimand has been placed in respondent's file. No further action is warranted at this time. Letter of reprimand. Not license revocation, not suspension. A letter. Simone read the ruling 3 times. Then she filed it. She'd expected this too. The system protected its own. Garrett Loomis still had his license, could still manage properties, could still do to other tenants what he'd done to her and Mrs. Turner, and the family in 3A and all the others. But the letter was on his record, permanently. And the next time someone filed a complaint, the next time a pattern emerged, that letter would be part of the evidence. Accountability wasn't always dramatic. Sometimes it was just a letter in a file, waiting. She added the ruling to her timeline. December 1st. GREC issues reprimand, license retained. Then she opened a new folder. She'd been tracking Garrett Loomis since the assault in June. Not stalking, Nothing that could be construed as harassment, just monitoring, public records, social media, professional listings. He'd moved to Florida in September, Sarasota, started a consulting firm called Loomis Property Solutions. The website described him as a property optimization specialist with over a decade of experience in residential management. No mention of the HUD complaint, no mention of the GREC reprimand, no mention of the eviction tactics or the fabricated complaints or the perjured testimony. Just a fresh start in a new state where no one knew his history. Simone looked at the website for a long moment. Then she drafted an email. To the Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulation, attaching the GREC ruling, attaching the HUD consent decree, attaching the Channel 5 story. Not a complaint, just information for their records. Some threads could be extended, even across state lines. January 7th, 1 year since move-in. Simone stood in the parking lot of 2847 Collier Road Northwest, watching the morning light spread across the brick facade. The building looked the same. Same fire escapes, same windows, same faint smell of exhaust from the street. But something had changed. Something invisible but real. The new property manager, a woman named Denise Crawford, hired specifically for her fair housing expertise, had implemented every policy Simone had recommended. Third-party complaint review, 48-hour documentation requirements for all tenant interactions, quarterly audits of eviction patterns by race and income. The first audit had come back clean. No disparities, no patterns, no fabricated complaints. Progress. Mrs. Turner still lived in 4B. So did the young couple in 4A. So did the elderly man in 2C who'd moved in last month, after hearing from a friend that the management here is different now. Small changes, but real. Simone's phone buzzed. Text from her office. Board meeting at 10, quarterly review, don't be late. She looked at the building one more time. Then she got in her car and drove downtown. The quarterly review took 3 hours. Portfolio performance, occupancy rates, maintenance costs, capital expenditures, the machinery of commercial real estate, grinding forward as it always did. When it was over, Simone returned to her office, closed the door, sat at her desk, and opened the folder she'd been keeping since October. Whitmire, Harold J. Judicial Conduct Review, Conduct. Inside, 4 cases now, 4 eviction proceedings, 2021 through 2024. Same judge, same pattern, same outcome. Case 1, Marcus Thompson, 2021. Black male, age 34. Evicted for repeated noise violations after 3 months of tenancy. No complaints on record with the county. Case 2, Keisha Williams, 2022. Black female, age 28. Evicted for unauthorized occupants after 4 months of tenancy. She lived alone. Case 3, Jerome and Patricia Davis, 2023. Black couple, ages 52 and 49. Evicted for failure to maintain property standards after 6 months of tenancy. No maintenance complaints in their file. Case 4, Simone Ashford, 2024. Black female, age 42. Evicted for material lease violations, including noise, property damage, and non-payment. All allegations contradicted by documentation. 4 cases. 4 black tenants. 4 rulings in favor of the same property management company. Coincidence was possible, probable even, given the demographics of the area and the volume of cases that Judge Whitmire handled. But the transcript for Simone's case, the one she'd requested 3 times, was still unavailable. Audio recording malfunction, the clerk's office said. No backup exists. Convenient. She'd filed a complaint with the Georgia Judicial Qualifications Commission back in May. 7 months later, the status was still pending preliminary review. The system moved slowly, especially when it was reviewing itself. But Simone had time. She added a note to the file. January 7th. GJQC status, pending. Monitor for updates. Then she closed the folder. The consent decree required 3 years of monitoring. Judge Whitmire had 11 more years on the bench before mandatory retirement. Simone had time, and she had records. That night, her apartment downtown, 23rd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the city lights. Simone sat on her couch, laptop open, reviewing the day's emails. Routine correspondence, legal updates, a message from Mrs. Turner thanking her again for the lease, and one new message from an address she didn't recognize. Subject, thank you. Ms. Ashford, you don't know me. My name is Keisha Williams. I was evicted from 2847 Collier Road in 2022. I saw the Channel 5 story. I saw what you did, what you documented, what you proved. I didn't fight when they evicted me. I couldn't afford a lawyer. Couldn't afford to miss work for court dates. Couldn't afford to believe that the system would ever take my side. I just left, found another apartment, tried to forget. But I didn't forget. I couldn't. Because I knew what they did to me wasn't right. I just didn't know how to prove it. You proved it. For me. For all of us. I don't know if this matters to you. I don't know if you need to hear it. But I wanted to say thank you. For fighting when I couldn't. For documenting what they wanted to erase. For making it real. Whatever happens next, whatever the system does or doesn't do, at least now there's a record. At least now someone believed us. Thank you, Keisha Williams. Simone read the email 3 times. Then she closed her laptop, turned off the lights, stood at the window, looking out at the city. Somewhere out there, Garrett Loomis was starting over in Florida. Judge Whitmire was still on the bench. Councilman Calhoun was enjoying his retirement. The system was still the system, slow, self-protective, resistant to change. But there was a record now, a pattern documented, a foundation laid, and 412 pages of evidence that proved what happened. Simone turned away from the window. Tomorrow, there would be more work, more cases, more patterns to document, more leverage to build, more small incremental changes that might, someday, add up to something larger. But tonight, she allowed herself one moment. Not of triumph, not of satisfaction, just acknowledgement. She'd done what she could, with the resources she had, against a system designed to protect itself. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. But it was something. She went to bed and slept. 3 weeks later, the letter arrived on a Tuesday, official letterhead, Georgia Judicial Qualifications Commission. R.E. Complaint against Honorable Harold J. Whitmire, Fulton County Magistrate Court. Dear Ms. Ashford, the Judicial Qualifications Commission has completed its preliminary review of your complaint dated May 15, 2024. Based on the information provided, the Commission finds insufficient evidence to warrant formal investigation at this time. The matters raised in your complaint, specifically questions regarding judicial decisions in eviction proceedings, fall within the scope of normal judicial discretion and do not, standing alone, suggest misconduct warranting Commission action. Please note that this determination does not preclude you from raising these concerns through other appropriate channels, including direct appeal of individual rulings. Thank you for bringing this matter to our attention. Sincerely, Executive Director, Georgia Judicial Qualifications Commission. Simone read the letter twice, then she filed it. Insufficient evidence, normal judicial discretion, the system protecting its own. Again, still, always. But the complaint was on record, the pattern was documented. And when the next person filed a complaint about Judge Whitmire, the next tenant who lost despite evidence, the next black family pushed out of their home by a system that was supposed to protect them, there would be a file waiting, a file that showed this wasn't the first time, wasn't an isolated incident, wasn't a coincidence. Simone opened her laptop, created a new folder. Whitmire. Appeals options. The court transcript was still unavailable. The direct ruling couldn't be challenged without it. But there were other approaches, other pressure points, other ways to build a record. She started typing. The consent decree required 3 years of monitoring. Judge Whitmire had 11 more years on the bench. Simone closed her laptop. She had time. The end. The monitoring period ended on a Tuesday, June 15th, 3 years to the day since the consent decree was signed in that windowless conference room at the HUD regional office. 3 years of quarterly audits, third-party oversight, documented compliance reviews. Simone received the final report at 9:17 a.m., 47 pages. Executive summary on page 1. Conclusion. Apex Portfolio Property Number 47, formerly Loomis Holdings, has maintained full compliance with all provisions of Consent Decree Number ATL-2024-0892 throughout the monitoring period. No violations observed. No discriminatory patterns identified. Recommended status: monitoring complete. No further oversight required. She read the conclusion 3 times. Then she turned to page 38, the section she'd been waiting for. Comparative analysis. Tenant demographics and outcomes, 2021 to 2027. Pre-acquisition period, 2021 to 2024. Eviction filings, 23. Eviction filings involving minority tenants, 19, 82.6%. Successful evictions, 21. Successful evictions involving minority tenants, 18, 85.7%. Post-acquisition period, 2024 to 2027. Eviction filings, 4. Eviction filings involving minority tenants, 2, 50.0%. Successful evictions, 2. Successful evictions involving minority tenants, 1, 50.0%. Note: the dramatic reduction in eviction filings correlates with implementation of new complaint verification protocols and third-party review requirements. The shift in demographic proportionality suggests elimination of previously observed discriminatory patterns. Numbers: cold, clinical, bureaucratic. But behind each number, a family, a home, a life that wasn't disrupted, wasn't uprooted, wasn't erased. Simone closed the report. Progress. Real, measurable, documented progress. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. But it was something. Mrs. Gladys Turner died on August 3rd. Simone learned about it from Denise Crawford, the property manager she'd hired 3 years ago, a phone call at 7:15 a.m. before the workday started. She passed in her sleep. The nurse found her this morning. Peaceful, they said. No pain. Simone was quiet for a long moment. How long had she been ill? 6 months, maybe longer. She didn't like to talk about it. Denise paused. She left something for you, at the front desk. Said you'd know what it meant. Simone drove to the building that afternoon. The lobby looked different now. Fresh paint, new lighting, a community bulletin board with actual community notices, book club meetings, lost pets, neighborhood watch schedules. Not the surveillance tool Paige Drummond had used, but something genuine. The envelope was waiting at the front desk, plain white, her name written in shaky handwriting on the front. Inside, a single sheet of paper, lined, torn from a notebook. The handwriting was difficult to read, the tremor of age and illness visible in every stroke. Ms. Ashford, if you're reading this, I've gone home to the Lord. Don't be sad. I lived a good long life, and the last 3 years were the most peaceful I've had in decades. I wanted to thank you one more time. Not just for what you did for me, but for what you did for everyone who comes after. The families who'll never know your name, who'll never know what almost happened to them because you made sure it couldn't. I kept something for you. In my apartment, in the closet, top shelf, a box. Everything I remembered about the others, the ones who left before you came, names, dates, what they told me before they went. I couldn't prove anything. I was just an old woman with a bad memory and no power. But I remembered. And now you can too. Use it however you see fit, or don't use it at all. It's yours now. Thank you for believing me when no one else did. Gladys Turner. Simone stood in the lobby for a long time, holding the letter. Then she went upstairs. The box was where Mrs. Turner said it would be. Cardboard, faded, the kind that once held reams of printer paper. Inside, 17 handwritten pages. Names, dates, fragments of conversations remembered across years. Marcus Thompson, moved out February 2021, said they accused him of dealing drugs. Never any proof. Nice young man, worked at the hospital. Keisha Williams, moved out August 2022, said they told her she had people living with her. She lived alone. Cried when she left. Jerome and Patricia Davis, moved out March 2023. 22 years they lived here. 22 years. Said Garrett told them the building was changing and they should think about their options. 17 pages, 11 families, 31 people by Simone's count. 31 lives, documented by an elderly woman with a bad memory and no power. Simone sat on Mrs. Turner's bed, stripped now, mattress bare, and read every page. Then she added the box to her files. The memorial service was held at a church 3 blocks from the building. Small congregation, modest flowers. The kind of funeral that doesn't make the papers, but fills every pew. Simone sat in the back row. She didn't know most of the mourners, Mrs. Turner's church friends, distant relatives, neighbors from the old days. But she knew one face. Keisha Williams sat in the 3rd row, the woman who'd emailed her 3 years ago, thanking her for fighting when she couldn't. After the service, they found each other in the parking lot. Ms. Ashford? Keisha's voice was thick. I didn't expect to see you here. Mrs. Turner was my friend, one of the only people who told me the truth when it would have been easier to stay silent. Keisha nodded slowly. She was like that, always noticing things, always remembering. She paused. She told me about you, you know, after the news story. Called me up, I didn't even know she had my number, and said, that woman who bought the building, she's going to change things. You watch. Did she say anything else? She said you reminded her of her daughter, the one who passed in 09. Keisha's eyes were wet now. Said her daughter had the same look, like she was carrying something heavy but refused to put it down. Simone didn't know how to respond to that. Ms. Williams, Keisha, I have something that belonged to Mrs. Turner. Notes she kept about the tenants who were pushed out, including you. Keisha's expression flickered. Pain, recognition, something old and unhealed. She remembered me? She remembered everyone. They stood in the parking lot for a long time, 2 strangers connected by a building they'd both lost, and a woman who'd witnessed everything. What are you going to do with the notes? Keisha finally asked. Simone considered the question. I'm not sure yet, but I want you to know they exist. Your story exists, on the record, documented. Keisha nodded, wiped her eyes. That matters, she said quietly. More than you probably know. That matters. This story has resonated with so many of you. If you want to see more stories like this, subscribe and leave a comment below. October. 3 years and 4 months after the eviction ruling, Judge Harold Whitmire announced his retirement. The press release was brief. Health reasons, family considerations, a distinguished career of public service. No mention of complaints, no mention of patterns, no mention of the file that had been growing in Simone's cabinet for 3 years. But Simone knew. She'd continued documenting, quietly, methodically, every eviction case that crossed Whitmire's docket, every outcome, every demographic data point she could legally obtain. The pattern had continued. Not as stark as before, perhaps he'd grown more careful, perhaps the publicity around her case had made him cautious, but present, still present. 14 eviction cases involving minority tenants in 3 years, 12 rulings in favor of the landlord, 1 settlement, 1 dismissal, 14 cases involving white tenants in the same period, 8 rulings in favor of the landlord, 3 settlements, 3 dismissals. Not proof, not evidence that would stand up in court, but a pattern, a documented, time-stamped, verifiable pattern. She'd submitted 2 more complaints to the Judicial Qualifications Commission. Both were dismissed. Insufficient evidence. Normal judicial discretion. The same language, over and over. But the complaints were on record. The pattern was documented. And now Whitmire was retiring. She'd never know if her complaints contributed to that decision. If the accumulating file, the growing record, the persistent documentation had finally become too much to ignore. She'd never know. And that was fine. The point wasn't punishment. The point was the record. The day after the retirement announcement, Simone received an email from a law professor at Emory University. Ms. Ashford, I'm writing to request your participation in a research project examining judicial decision-making patterns in housing court cases. Your documentation of the Whitmire eviction cases has come to our attention through public records requests, and we believe your data could contribute significantly to our understanding of potential bias in landlord-tenant proceedings. Would you be willing to share your files? We would, of course, provide appropriate academic credit and maintain strict confidentiality regarding any sensitive information. Professor David Chen, Emory University School of Law. Simone read the email twice. Then she replied, Professor Chen, I would be happy to discuss sharing my documentation. However, I should note that my files extend beyond the Whitmire cases to include broader patterns of discriminatory housing practices in the Atlanta metro area. I also have recently acquired additional documentation from a deceased tenant who maintained her own records for approximately 15 years. This material has not yet been fully cataloged. If your research project could accommodate this broader scope, I believe we could accomplish something meaningful together. Please contact my office to schedule a meeting. Simone Ashford. The meeting happened 2 weeks later. Professor Chen brought 2 graduate students and a stack of consent forms. Simone brought 4 filing boxes and a flash drive containing 847 scanned documents. The research project was published 18 months later in the Yale Law Journal. Patterns of Disparity, an Empirical Analysis of Eviction Outcomes in Atlanta Housing Courts, 2015 to 2027. The study found statistically significant disparities in eviction outcomes based on tenant race, even when controlling for income, payment history, and alleged lease violations. The data suggested that black tenants were 2.3 times more likely to face eviction proceedings and 1.8 times more likely to lose those proceedings than white tenants with comparable circumstances. The study cited Simone's documentation extensively. It also cited Mrs. Turner's notes, cataloged, verified, and cross-referenced against public records. The study didn't change anything immediately. Academic papers rarely did. But it entered the record. It became citable. It became something that lawyers could reference, that journalists could quote, that future researchers could build upon. The foundation grew. 5 years after the eviction ruling. Garrett Loomis filed for bankruptcy in Florida. Simone learned about it through a Google alert she'd set up years ago and never bothered to disable. His consulting firm, Loomis Property Solutions, had collapsed after a series of client complaints and a cease and desist order from the Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulation. The details were in the public filings. 2 former clients had accused him of mismanaging their properties. One had filed a civil suit alleging fraud. The fraud case had settled out of court, terms undisclosed, but the damage to his reputation was done. She read the bankruptcy filing carefully. Assets, minimal. Liabilities, $340,000 in personal debt, including $127,000 in legal fees from the civil suit. Status, Chapter 7, liquidation. She didn't feel satisfaction. She'd expected to, had imagined this moment for years, but when it arrived, there was only emptiness. The hollow feeling of watching someone self-destruct and knowing that the destruction, however deserved, didn't undo the harm they'd caused. Garrett Loomis was broke, his reputation was ruined, his career was over. But the families he'd pushed out of their homes were still scattered, still dealing with the disruption, the trauma, the eviction records that followed them for years. Mrs. Turner was still dead. The system that had enabled him was still intact. Justice wasn't balance. It never was. She closed the bankruptcy filing and moved on. 7 years after the eviction ruling, the eviction was sealed. Georgia law allowed sealing of eviction records after 7 years, provided there were no subsequent filings. Simone had waited, had checked her record annually, had ensured that no new complaints materialized to reset the clock. On March 15th, exactly 7 years after Judge Whitmer's ruling, she filed the sealing motion. It was granted without hearing. Routine, administrative. The record of her eviction, the fabricated complaints, the perjured testimony, the ruling that contradicted every piece of evidence she'd presented, was now invisible to standard background checks. Landlords couldn't see it. Employers couldn't see it. The system had, in its slow bureaucratic way, acknowledged that the record shouldn't follow her forever. But Simone kept her own copy, filed in the cabinet beside Mrs. Turner's notes, filed beside the HUD complaint and the consent decree and the GREC reprimand and the Yale Law Journal study. The system could seal its records, but she would keep hers. The call came on a Tuesday. Simone was in her office, corner suite, 32nd floor, the same view of Atlanta she'd looked at for 7 years, when her assistant knocked. "There's a woman here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's about the Collier Road property. Says her name is Patricia Davis." Patricia Davis. The name was familiar. Simone searched her memory, then her files. Jerome and Patricia Davis. Evicted March 2023. 22 years in the building. Mrs. Turner's notes. Said Garrett told them the building was changing, and they should think about their options. Send her in. Patricia Davis was 61 now, older than Simone had imagined, gray-haired, walking with a slight limp that suggested old injury or chronic pain. She wore a church dress, modest jewelry, the careful appearance of someone who'd grown up being told that presentation mattered. "Ms. Ashford?" Her voice was quiet but steady. "I'm sorry to come without calling. I didn't know if you'd see me." "Please, sit down." Patricia sat, folded her hands in her lap, looked around the office, the view, the furniture, the evidence of success, with an expression Simone couldn't quite read. "I saw your picture in the paper last month, that article about the housing study, and I thought, I've been thinking for years, actually, that I should come talk to you. About what happened at Collier Road. About what happened. And what I didn't do." Patricia's hands tightened in her lap. "I knew what they were doing. Jerome and I both knew. We saw them push out the Thompson boy and the Williams girl and all the others. We knew it wasn't right." She paused, swallowed. "But we didn't say anything. 22 years we lived there. 22 years of keeping our heads down, minding our own business, telling ourselves that if we just stayed quiet, they'd leave us alone." Her voice cracked. "And then they came for us anyway." Simone waited. "Jerome passed last year. Heart attack. He never got over losing that apartment. Never got over feeling like we'd been erased." Patricia looked up, and her eyes were wet. "I came here to apologize, for not speaking up when it might have mattered, for not being like Mrs. Turner, God rest her soul, who had the courage to tell you the truth." Simone was quiet for a moment. "Mrs. Davis, you don't owe me an apology. You were trying to survive. We all were. But you did more than survive. You fought back. You documented. You—" She gestured at the office, the view, the evidence of everything Simone had built. "You made it mean something. I had resources you didn't have, money, connections, a company behind me that could absorb the risk of fighting back." Simone leaned forward. "The fact that I won doesn't make your choice wrong. It makes the system wrong, a system that forces people to choose between their homes and their dignity." Patricia wiped her eyes. "I brought you something." She reached into her purse, pulled out a worn envelope. Letters. From Jerome to Garrett Loomis. From 2019 through 2023. Every complaint we ever filed, every request for repair, every time we asked them to fix the heat, fix the plumbing, fix the broken lock on the front door. She handed the envelope to Simone. They never responded, not once. But Jerome kept copies. Said someday someone might need to know what really happened in that building. Simone opened the envelope. 16 letters, typed and dated, each one a model of polite, persistent advocacy. December 12, 2019. Dear Mr. Loomis, I am writing to request repair of the heating unit in Unit 3A, which has not functioned properly since November. The temperature in our apartment has dropped below 50 degrees on multiple occasions. Please advise when a technician can be scheduled. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Sincerely, Jerome Davis. March 3, 2021. Dear Mr. Loomis, this is my 4th request for repair of the persistent leak in our bathroom ceiling. The damage is now spreading to the adjacent wall. I have attached photographs documenting the deterioration. Please advise. Sincerely, Jerome Davis. September 17, 2022. Dear Mr. Loomis, I am writing to formally dispute the noise complaint filed against our unit on September 14th. My wife and I were not home on the date in question, as documented by the attached receipt from our visit to the Emory Hospital cardiac unit. Please remove this complaint from our file. Sincerely, Jerome Davis. 16 letters, 4 years of documentation, evidence of a pattern that predated Simone's arrival by half a decade. Mrs. Davis. Simone looked up from the letters. Would you be willing to share these with the researchers at Emory? They're working on a follow-up study, and this documentation could be invaluable. Patricia nodded slowly. Jerome would have wanted that. He always said the truth had a way of coming out, if you just kept writing it down. She stood, adjusted her purse. Thank you for seeing me, Ms. Ashford. I know you're busy. I just needed... She paused. I needed to do something, even if it's too late, even if it doesn't change anything. It's not too late. Simone stood too. And it does change things. Maybe not the past, but the record, the evidence, the foundation for whatever comes next. Patricia looked at her for a long moment. You really believe that, don't you? That the record matters? That documentation is enough? I believe it's a start. Simone walked her to the door. And sometimes, a start is all we get. 10 years after the eviction ruling, Simone stood in the lobby of 2847 Collier Road Northwest for the last time. The building had been sold 6 months ago, part of a portfolio restructuring that had nothing to do with the property itself and everything to do with market conditions and investment cycles. The new owners were a pension fund from Ohio, faceless and institutional, interested only in returns, but the policies remained. Written into the deed, codified in the HOA agreements, third-party review of eviction proceedings, demographic monitoring of tenant complaints, the infrastructure of accountability that Simone had built, preserved beyond her ownership. The new property manager, Denise Crawford, had retired 2 years ago, met her at the front desk. Ms. Ashford, we weren't expecting you. I was in the neighborhood. A lie, but a polite one. I wanted to see the building one more time. The manager nodded. Didn't ask questions. Simone walked the hallways alone, past 4B, where a young family now lived, past 4C, her old apartment, where an elderly couple had celebrated their 50th anniversary last spring, past the stairwell where Garrett Loomis had watched her years ago, waiting for her to break. She didn't go inside any of the units. Didn't need to. The building wasn't about the spaces anymore. It was about what had happened in them, what had been documented, what had been preserved. On her way out, she stopped at the community bulletin board. A new notice had been posted that morning. Official letterhead, Atlanta Housing Authority. Notice, effective January 1st, all residential properties in Fulton County will be required to participate in the Fair Housing Compliance Monitoring Program. This program, established by City Ordinance 2034-47, requires third-party review of eviction proceedings and demographic reporting of tenant complaints. Property owners who fail to comply may be subject to fines and loss of rental licensing. For more information, contact the Atlanta Housing Authority Fair Housing Division. Simone read the notice twice. City Ordinance 2034-47. She hadn't heard about it, hadn't been involved in its drafting, hadn't even known it was under consideration, but she recognized the language, the requirements, the infrastructure. It was her policy, the one she'd implemented at this building 10 years ago, codified now into city law, applied to every rental property in the county. She didn't know who had pushed for the ordinance, didn't know which council member had championed it, which advocacy group had organized for it, which tenants had testified in its favor. But she knew where the idea had come from, knew that somewhere, in some legislative file, there was a reference to the Collier Road property, to the consent decree, to the Yale Law Journal study, to the documentation that had accumulated, piece by piece, over a decade. The foundation she'd built, extended now beyond anything she could have imagined. She took a photograph of the notice, added it to her files. Then she walked out of the building and didn't look back. That night, her apartment downtown, same building she'd moved into after the eviction, same view of the city lights. Simone sat on her couch, laptop open, reviewing the day's emails. Routine correspondence, legal updates, a message from the Emory research team sharing preliminary findings from their latest study. And one new message from an address she didn't recognize. Subject: You don't know me, but... Ms. Ashford, my name is Destiny Williams. I'm Keisha Williams's daughter. I don't know if you remember my mother. She was evicted from Collier Road in 2022, before you bought the building. I'm writing because I'm starting law school next fall. Emory, housing law concentration. My mother told me your story when I was 15. Told me about the eviction, about the documentation, about the woman who bought the building and made things change. I didn't really understand it then. I was just a kid, angry at the world, angry at the system that had taken our home. But I understand it now. I'm going to law school because of you. Because you showed me that the system can be fought. Not fixed, I'm not naive enough to believe that anymore, but fought, documented, held accountable. I'm going to specialize in tenant rights, going to learn everything I can about fair housing law, eviction defense, housing discrimination litigation. And someday, I'm going to do what you did, build a record, create a foundation, make the system answer for what it does. I don't expect you to respond to this. I just wanted you to know that what you did mattered, not just for my mother or for Mrs. Turner or for the families at Collier Road, but for me, for my future, for whatever I'm able to build because you showed me it was possible. Thank you. Destiny Williams. Simone read the email 3 times. Then she sat in the darkness of her apartment, looking out at the city, and allowed herself to feel something she rarely permitted. Hope. Not the naive hope that the system would fix itself, not the blind hope that justice would prevail, but something smaller, more durable, the hope that the work continued, that the record grew, that somewhere a 15-year-old girl had read about documentation and leverage and accountability and decided to spend her life building on that foundation. Simone opened a new email. Dear Destiny, I remember your mother. I remember her email 3 years after my eviction, thanking me for fighting when she couldn't. But I want you to understand something. I didn't win. Not really. The system is still the system. Garrett Loomis faced bankruptcy, but he never faced prison. Judge Whitmere retired with his reputation intact. The families who were pushed out never got their homes back. What I did was document, preserve, build a record that couldn't be erased. That's what you'll do too if you go into this work. Not fix the system, that's beyond any one person's power, but document its failures. Build the evidence, create the foundation for whatever comes next. It's frustrating work, slow work, work that often feels pointless in the moment. But it matters. It matters because someday, someone will need that record. Someone will need to prove that the pattern exists, that the harm is real, that the system has been failing for years. And when they need it, it will be there. Because you built it. Because you preserved it. Because you refused to let the truth be erased. That's the work. It's not glamorous. It's not fast. But it's necessary. Welcome to it. If you ever need guidance, advice, or just someone to remind you why this matters, my door is open. Simone Ashford Postscript. I have files that might be useful for your studies, documentation spanning 15 years, including material from tenants who aren't alive to tell their own stories. Let me know if you'd like access. She sent the email. Then she closed her laptop, turned off the lights, and stood at the window. The city stretched out below her. Millions of people in millions of homes. Some secure, some precarious. Some facing the same battles she'd fought, with fewer resources and less leverage. The system was still the system. Slow, self-protective, resistant to change. But the record existed now. The documentation. The foundation. And somewhere, a young woman was going to law school, learning the tools, preparing to build on what had been built before. That was enough. It had to be enough. Simone turned away from the window. Tomorrow, there would be more work, more patterns to document, more foundations to lay. But tonight, she rested. The work would continue. It always did. The end.
Thank you for taking the time to watch this video today. If you found the content helpful, please remember to like and subscribe so you won't miss our upcoming episodes. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to leave a comment below. We are always here to listen.